I believe Fausto is here. Town of Sahuarita.
Heidi Lasham.
Thank you. Town of Oro Valley.
Zay Rodriguez.
Adot Tucson District.
Rod Lane.
Tohono O'odham Nation. I believe Patricia.
Hello, Patricia Pavla.
Thank you. Pascua Yaqui Tribe. See them. City of South Tucson. Here, City of Tucson.
Sam Credio.
Pima County.
Catherine Skinner.
Adot Transportation Planning Division.
Mark Hoffman.
Tucson Airport Authority. Okay. Suntran.
Davida Mueller.
Thank you. University of Arizona.
Mark Novak.
Pima County DEQ.
Natalie Shep.
TO Nation San Javier District. I believe we have one of our ex officio members here, Mr. Romero Truly from FHWA.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Back to you, Jeanette.
All right, with that, I believe we have quorum. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you are paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. With that, I appreciate all of you being here, and please report any in-kind reporting. With that, we will move on to the approval of the May 18th, 2022 meeting summary. The summary was in the packet. If you have any questions or comments on that, please let us know. If not, a motion would be appreciated.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes. This is Sam Credio, City of Tucson.
Thank you, Sam. Do we have a second?
I'll second. Catherine Skinner.
Thank you, Catherine. And can we have a vote, please? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Any dissent? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 4. This is the election of the TPC chair and vice chair. So our past chair and vice chair have moved on to different positions, and so that leaves these positions vacant. So do I have any volunteers? This is a list of eligible members that are able to serve as chair and vice chair. And then Sonia, if you could go to the next slide, or Crystal. There's a few limitations in the TPC bylaws for who can serve as chair and vice chair. So neither the chair or vice chair may be from the same jurisdiction as the PAG regional council chair or vice chair. So that would exclude the town of Oro Valley because Mayor Winfield is the chair of the regional council. And that would also mean that Pascua Yaqui tribe is also not eligible. With those 2 exceptions though, everybody else is eligible. So if you're willing to volunteer, please let me know.
Jeanette, this is Sam Credio. I'd like to nominate Catherine Skinner from Pima County as the chair if she's willing to accept the nomination.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay, fantastic. So do we have a nomination for vice chair?
Can you throw up the list of choices again for us?
Sure. Is anybody willing to volunteer for vice chair or nominate somebody for vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Rod Lane from Adot.
All right. Rod, are you willing to serve as vice chair?
I'm thinking. Typically, it's not a role that ADOT statewide likes to do. So I would respectfully decline. I would, however, like to nominate Sam Credio as vice chair.
All right, Sam, you've been nominated.
I'll accept.
All right. So then if we could have a election, so a motion to approve Catherine Skinner as the chair and Sam Credio as vice chair. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
All right, so moved by Fausto. Is there a second?
This is Rod. I'll second.
All right, second by Rod. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any dissent? All right. Catherine, we'll have Zonia send you the chair agenda. I'll move on to the next item while she gets that to you, and you can serve as the chair for the rest of the meeting. Okay, agenda item number 5. This is fiscal year 2022-2026 TIP amendment number 2022.040, programming of additional ADOT funds, ASTBG, ASTP, and associated adjustments to ADOT's previously approved TIP projects. Carolyn Laurie has a presentation for us.
Great. Good morning, Jeanette. Thank you, and welcome, Madam newly elected Madam Chair and Vice Chair, members of the committee. Today, we're going to be reviewing a recent TIP amendment that was requested by ADOT. And this was a request that came through the district engineer in regards to new funding that was allocated to our region through the RAP process, which is also known as the ADOT Resource Allocation Advisory Committee. If I could please ask for the next slide. Okay. Thank you. There are 2 projects that are associated with this amendment. The first one is the I-10 Country Club TI. This is a project that we've been tracking in our region for the last couple of years. It's in alignment with the ADOT DRC that was released a couple of years ago. And essentially this funding allows them to move forward on the project at kind of an escalated rate. And it's been approved at the state level. And today we're asking you to look at both of these projects in harmony with our TIP. Next slide, please. The next project is I-10 Kino TI. This project is in its early design phases, and this is new funding to the region for this project. And with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Mark Hoffman or Rod Lane to provide any additional information if necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair and committee members, this is Mark Hoffman. So as you remember, earlier this year, ADOT Finance had released the RAC numbers for FY27, and it also included the increases based on the new transportation bill. And then in May, ADOT Finance released an update and an increase to that RAC funding for the PAG region over the same 5 years. This is fiscal year 23 through 27. The total amount of the 5 years that was released earlier this year was approximately $558.4 million. And then the May increase was approximately $202.9 million in addition to that. So over the 5 years is what we're looking at now is $761.4 million for ADOT major projects in the PAG region. So this amendment request specifically addresses fiscal year 23 to make sure that we're fully programmed there in the current TIP. And then we also wanted to show, to get those projects initiated, we wanted to show full project funding on both those projects, Keynote TI and Country Club.
Okay. Mr. Hoffman, if I could ask you just to quickly address the 2.6 on the I-10 Keynote TI, please.
Yes, and then on the Keynote TI, to fully meet the expected expense, there is 2.6, 10 million added programmed on that project in 24 and 25 to meet those expected costs, and that was vetted through Adot Finance for cash flow to make sure that that was fiscally constrained, and it was. So that's the additional programming of the HERF 2.6 dollars on that project.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question. As we have some new members on our committee, if you could describe how the 2.6 funds are intended to be programmed in the region.
So based on Adot State Transportation Board policy, the HERF 2.6 dollars are limited to programming on the Adot system in the PAG region.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Madam Chair, is there any other questions I can answer for you or the committee?
Sure, I have a question. I mean, with the 2.6 funding specifically, I know that the amount of funding we're adding here exceeds what our tip shows as being available for the region. So from a PAG policy perspective, how does this match our fiscal constraint analysis?
That's a great question. So there's two aspects to that. The first one is that Adot has gone through and done their fiscal constraint on their end of the process, and they've checked their cash flows and the funding is available. On the PAG side, we're beginning the process here with your committee to discuss the funding allowances. We do have, assurances that the funding is available from Adot, and these formal tip amendments will move up through the committee chains for formal review. Once, hopefully they're approved at regional council level, those items will be formally programmed into our tip, and then the funding will then show against our ledgers, and we won't be in fiscal constraint. Is there?
Thank you. It's always hard when there's a lot of moving pieces right before we're about to do our revenue projections for the upcoming tip. Right. So in some respects, it's like the 2.6 would have been nice to wait for an amendment until we do that overarching process, because it is slightly different than the ASTP in my mind.
So yes, I think that's a valid point. And traditionally, we would run this through the tip development process, which Mr. Brown will address later in our agenda. However, because the funding was allocated at the state level, we were requested to move it forward a little sooner. And we do, acknowledge that it's a little bit out of sequence. However, with the approval of the state level, we felt like we needed to move it forward for them, especially with the design funds for 23, because we're now in FY23, and we wanted them to be able to move forward with their planning and design work.
Thank you. I don't have any additional questions. Does any of the rest of the committee? Well, I don't know if I should take over now, Jeanette, or if you want to finish out this item.
I'll finish out this item. So hearing no further questions, this is an action item. And there's a proposed motion in the PowerPoint slide. So if somebody would like to move the item.
Vote to approve the tip amendment.
Okay, motion by Jose. Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Rod.
All right, a second by Mr. Lane. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. Any objections? Okay, hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I guess we can move on to item 6 on the agenda. I got I got Zonia's email, so I can follow that. The item 6 is the legislative update on proposed transportation related legislation. David Zinda will be presenting.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. So we are now at the conclusion of formally denoted second regular session of the 55th Arizona State Legislature, which adjourned on Saturday, June 25th at 12:25 a.m. Nice and late. As the session has ended, this will be my final legislative update until a new state session begins. So I guess you won't be seeing me then until at least agenda item 8 or 9 for this meeting, but as for legislative updates, David, he is gone until January. So continuing on, the state legislature passed and the governor signed an $18 billion budget for fiscal year 2023. The larger budget is a result of over $4 billion surplus in state revenues. Around $1 billion of this budget was appropriated for various transportation projects throughout the state, including $400 million for the I-10 widening from Chandler to Casa Grande. The main bill detailing the exact list of transportation projects throughout the state is going to be House Bill 2858. Again, that's 2858, Capital Outlay Appropriations. So you can find that on azleg.gov to see the exact list. Moving on to highlight some of those that we've been watching, other bills that were included in this list and other regional projects of interest. The first was House Bill 2396. This was an appropriations bill. Recall that transportation, or rather appropriations bills on the whole, typically are folded into the budget. And so the base bill dies and other projects listed in the appropriations may live on. This bill was influenced by the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council and earmarked about $50 million to various projects in rural areas. Several of those more rural projects were included in that capital outlay bill, House Bill 2858. I think this is important to know because this is a good indicator that at least some of the legislature is still interested in providing funding for some new and rural improvements outside of the normal state highway system. Moving on, House Bill 2598, which was a striker amendment, / House Bill 2685 / Senate Bill 1356, all the same bill regarding the transportation tax in Maricopa County. It's essentially their version of the RTA, which by state statute, each time it's going to be put on the ballot again after it's 20 years, has to go through the state legislature and be signed by the governor. Although it received strong bipartisan support in both chambers, House and Senate, it was vetoed after the session ended by the governor. Going on to House Bill 2728. This is one we've been following very carefully. It's appropriations bill for a Tier 2 study for not only the Sonoran Corridor, providing $14 million for that study, but also for I-11 in Maricopa for $25 million and $14 million for the North-South Corridor in Pinal County, all Tier 2 studies, of course. This project was included in that capital outlay bill and will provide funds for this Tier 2 study for Sonoran Corridor in 2023, this fiscal year. Moving on to Senate Bill 1148. This was the one that would affect the vehicle license tax. It advocated for the VLT to be calculated on the basis of actual sales price of a car and not the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Consequently, it would have lowered revenues. Estimates would have been about 70 million statewide annually. This bill died. It's gone. Maybe it comes back and is resurrected. I do not know. But as for this session, nothing to worry about. Senate Bill 1239 was the appropriation for widening I-10. Of course, we know that was signed before the budget process even began, and we have that $400 million secured from the general fund to widen I-10 from Chandler to Casa Grande. House Bill 2701 related to the transaction privilege tax in terms of prime contracting, reducing the tax base for prime contracting classification of the TPT from 60% to 55, and then down to 50. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. From 65 to 55, then to 50 over the next couple of fiscal years. This became a striker amendment, so all of that was stricken out and replaced with a policy surrounding licensing for hunting and fishing, essentially reducing the price for veterans. So the original TPT intent is dead, and if you are a veteran who likes hunting and fishing, you are in luck. Senate Bill 1004 is another TPT bill that we are watching for remote sellers, changing the taxable sales from remote sellers to, applying TPT to taxable sales instead of gross sales, which could have had a financial impact on the general fund, but this bill also died, so we need not to worry about it. With that, that concludes my summary of the end of this legislative session, unless there are any questions that I can answer for you all.
Thank you, David. Does the committee have any questions? I have one question, David. So the governor's veto for the MAG version of the RTA, how are we reflecting on that as a region? I mean, that's a pretty big deal that it got vetoed. It's a big difference, kind of is going to affect public opinion. Are we worried about that down here? Realizing the governor doesn't have a chance to veto ours, just the public opinion aspects of it.
Yes, thank you for your question. I can't quite speak to the future, but I do know I wasn't around here in 2006, but it seems like there was a lot of public outreach and engagement. And I would say we still certainly have time to continue to reach out to the community. And, you know, mind you, we have the Citizens Advisory Committee, which is made up of citizens that should reflect that public opinion to put forth projects that would be acceptable to citizens.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please speak up because it's hard to see all the hands on the screen. Sounds like not. We'll move on to the next item then. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Item 7 is the FAST Act performance measure projections. David Mitchell.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. One moment, I'm trying to get access to the slideshow. Crystal, I saw it briefly a second ago. Now I lost access to it.
Yeah, we somehow lost it. Just one second, David, and I'll get you back up there.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
David, don't touch your keyboard for a minute, please.
Okay.
Okay, David, go ahead and just use the arrows on your keyboard and see if that works.
Looks like I've got access now.
Okay. Let me get you back to your. Okay, go ahead.
There we are. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Madam Chair, thank you very much. And welcome. Good morning, everybody. I'm David Mitchell, Senior Transportation Planner here at PAG. Today, I'm bringing forward just an informational item for you, an update on the FAST Act program.
Click on the slide, David, real quick. There you go.
As a review, the FAST Act program was originally began with the MAP 21. That was a federal plan that rolled out some performance goal areas for transportation and to see a way of integrating performance-based planning into our state and MPO planning practices. Within that program, a package of performance measures had been created, and those were categorized within three main groups. Internally in the federal program, they're known as P1, P2, and P3, but they're labeled as safety, infrastructure, and system performance, respectively. The FAST Act, it was a legislation that came later, and that furthered the program established in MAP 21. It defined the data that's used in the performance measures and developing all the different metrics and also the methodology for performing the calculations. It also defined the performance periods and the requirements for the establishment of performance projections. And so we'll get into that as just as an overview level. And then there are some upcoming events that we'll be tracking as an agency and reporting back to this committee as events happen. The first performance area, these are our safety performance measures. There's 5 of them. Annually, ADOT sets those projections. And for the last four reporting periods, we have participated in the program by accepting and adopting the state projections. And those come out annually every fall. They include the 5 measures that we have listed here, the total number of fatalities and the fatality rates based on VMT, and also include the serious and incapacitating injuries for the same crashes. And these are crashes on all public roadways within the PAG region and also for the state. And then finally, the number of non-motorized. So these are your pedestrians and bicycles. So these 5 performance measures are tracked annually and projections are established by ADOT. Moving on to the next performance area. This is infrastructure. This is pavement condition. This is bridge condition. These will be on the interstate systems and the NHS networks. They have reporting periods of 2 and 4 year. The 4 year is for the final report, and there's a mid-period evaluation, mid-evaluation period that allows agencies to evaluate their 4-year projections and to integrate any new data or methodologies that they feel appropriate in doing so, and it allows them to allow flexibility in their long-term project projection setting. The performance measures in this category, there's 6 of them. This is your interstate payments, your NHS payments, and then the bridges on the NHS network. And then the third category, we're looking at the system performance. These are your congestion, your air quality, your freight movement. This category addresses multiple performance goal areas that were established in MAP 21, but it's packaged all together because they're related in terms of travel times and amount of times vehicles spend on the roadway. But these are also including 4 and 2 year projections, much like the infrastructure program. And the next slide will show the calendar of the reporting periods for these last 2. This set of performance measures includes 10 of them. 5 of them are in air quality. There's a couple for congestion, and then freight movement through the region. This is the performance calendar, if you would, the periods that were outlined in the FAST Act. We have just come to the end of the first reporting period, and we are amidst the beginning the second period. The ADOT is required to submit their baseline report October 1st of this year. Within the report, they'll include the 4-year and 2-year projections for the category P2 and P3 performance areas that I previously mentioned. So those include the infrastructure and the system performance measures. The way the program works is that the state has a responsibility for setting those projections, and they report those to FHWA. The MPOs participate by either adopting ADOT's or the state agencies' projections, or they have the freedom to establish their own. The guidance from FHWA is generally to have the MPOs adopt the state's and there are a few examples of MPOs doing their own. We have traditionally, as an agency, PAG has in the last 2 reporting periods, we have adopted the Adot projections. The safety projections that are going to be established for next reporting period will be due August 31st. Adot typically announces those formally in their in the announcement of their their strategic traffic safety plan. Again, those are annual projections that we'll be bringing through the committee process. Additionally, Adot will be required to submit their baseline report for this next upcoming FAST Act reporting period, and so those will include the projections for the remaining P2 and P3 category performance measures. They will send PAG, our leadership, a letter announcing such, and then that will essentially start the clock on the 180 days. At the moment, we are working with ADOT and MAG and other MPOs throughout the state. Just to be in discussion with ADOT, we understand their methodology, we're aware of their preliminary projections, and we're on board. Their general practice is to have conservative performance measures and to use trend data that was established before COVID. And the reason for such is that the COVID data of the last 2-3 years is not providing enough insight to where they should be projecting out. Part of the FAST Act requirement is to have a realistic and defensible projections. And so ADOT leans on being conservative and using pre-COVID trends to apply to current data sets. So with that, I'll close out the information that I have to present, but I will open up to any questions. Madam Chair, I'll hand it back to you. And thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions from the committee? I'll start off with some questions. So I know it's been an ongoing discussion year after year as we, specifically on the safety item, as we adopt these, they were called targets, projections, but it's like you said, it's just a measure of where we are today and kind of forecasting into the future. It's not really our goals. So it sounds like we do a similar thing for all of these measures that you spoke of.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I will, you're referencing the performance measures that we've established in Rmap, and there is a lot of overlap between what we've established as our aspirational goals. So the targets and the projections that we've established in Rmap, those are the ones that we are aspiring to work towards, and that's how we would measure our success or the accomplishments of the goals set forth in the Rmap. There's a lot of overlap. For example, the safety ones, those are exactly the same measures that we track, the exact same metrics. And then where it does get a little different is when we compare the road networks used for the remaining performance measures. As you recall, throughout the my presentation, I kept referencing the NHS and the interstate networks. Well, those two combined account for less than 10%. I would say even less than 7% of the road network in our region. So you can see reporting out and using those measures as an informative process to tell a story about our entire network is never going to be the right story. So that's why we use the performance measures in Rmap to really track that. We do reporting out in our TIP, and we also do it when we do the Rmap updates. So those are regular chances for this community to see how we're performing towards our long-range target achievement. Does that answer your question? You had it.
Yeah, I know. I think that was really helpful because what I was kind of leading to is how, I understand, this is what our network is doing and we have to report on it as such, but that's really a backseat role. And I think it's important, especially as we're looking at the Rmap, as we're looking at RTA next, is how are we selecting projects and moving forward to try to achieve some of our actual goals for improving some of these metrics. And I was wondering, how is the TPC committee going to be engaged in that conversation? Or is it really just a report out from staff as different things are measured and developed in the Rmap?
Well, if I may continue, then I could add to what I've said to maybe build more confidence in the program. If you would, we use the Rmap performance measures program, since we're collecting that data set, we don't use it just primarily for reporting out. We actually have used metrics to feed into a lot of the tool sets that we use for example, the RTNX project board, previously in the Rmap and the other TIP project board that you have been using for many years. Those include performance data that we use to evaluate the performance measures. So as you're building your projects, you can use that information to help you learn more about your project area in terms of the data that we have and the performance criteria that we use. And so with that program that we've developed, we have received federal recognition for such. During our most recent, what do you call it, the recertification, MPO recertification, during that, a byproduct of that was the evaluation of our performance measures program. And through it all, in May, the FHWA released an example practices for MPOs in the performance-based programming. And PAG was highlighted in there for our practice of using performance measures in the project development cycle. So it's something that we we use as a guide and certainly have available for our jurisdictional members to use in their product selection. So if you ever need to learn more about that, please approach myself, Jeanette, of course, and you all know Josh Pope. He's the mastermind behind the technology.
Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.
Robin, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to add on to what you said. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. We have been using that data fairly regularly and a lot in order to choose our projects in our jurisdiction. And I had a question to follow up. Has this presentation, not of this particular item, but your metrics that you have created that are really awesome, thank you, to the CAC? And are they aware of how we as a region use those metrics to select projects?
Madam Chair, I can answer that question. Or, well, it looks like Josh raised his hand. He wants to.
I can jump in. This past Monday, I gave an overview of the PM report and what that PM assessment grid is, and gave the 30-minute, a kind of 20-minute overview with about 10, 15 minutes of questions that the group had on what those high-level metrics are. So we're just kind of starting to engage with the full committee. Back in November 2020, Paul Casertano and myself stepped through kind of a longer presentation giving background on what the land use model is and its relationship with the travel demand model, and how we feel comfortable as we can with the forecasted volumes and congestions and the process of stepping through the PopTech committee and working with the AOEO population projections and the Eller School employment projections, and then the distribution of that. So we've given a deeper presentation back in November 2020 that was about an hour and a half long. This past Monday, I gave a tighter presentation on the PM assessment grid, and they had some great questions as CAC is being vocal and really digging in and engaging. So great question. Thank you, Robin. Did that cover it?
It does. Thank you so much. And also thank you for all the work you do. It's very helpful, I think, for us all to have that data.
Great. Glad to hear that. We're excited to continue that work. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I mean, we use the performance measures a lot. We use all the applications that have been built. So just seeing how they all fit together in the process is really helpful. Thank you, David and Josh. I see Paul Casertano is raising his hand.
My name was mentioned, which always frightens me, but thank you, Josh and David, for all your work here. It's really great to have an understanding of what these measures are, but I want to just underscore the importance of understanding the track to target function. So we as project sponsors can get a really good feel of where we are falling behind on performance. So I just I don't know that there's a full understanding among CAC or even project sponsors that what areas we are not really trending well in. And I think that would be really valuable information to present along with what the measures themselves track, so we can understand that, well, maybe safety we're not performing terribly well on, but congestion is, a managed measure that needs some attention, but maybe it doesn't need all the attention or all the dollars, for example. So I just wanted to put that in there and request that there's opportunity to have the context of what are we trying to solve for included in the conversation.
Thanks, Paul. And just for the good of the group, I'm assuming most everybody knows, but Paul Casertano is now a Pima County transportation employee. He's no longer with PAG. So in case any of those on the call didn't know which perspective he's speaking on now, it's Pima County DOT. Are there any other questions or comments on this item?
Madam Chair, just to add to the Paul's comment, there is a performance measure dashboard that tracks those targets and looks at our regional footprint for these different performance measures across the Rmap goals and targets, and gives that longer view of past performance and what is our benchmark and what is our target. That allows us to kind of look at some metrics that aren't necessarily available at that segment level or intersection level. So that is that allows us to share that performance, and it's updated. So that may be an opportunity to there may be an opportunity to share more information on that in the future.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. If there's no more questions or discussion on this item, we can move on to the next. Thank you, David. So item 8 is the regional transportation revenues update. Jamie Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. I'll keep this brief. The TPC meeting packet memo for this item includes an update to the table we shared at the May meeting with updated revenue numbers for HERF 12626 and RTA, as well as the Federal Obligation Authority amounts. The meeting packet also includes an updated HERF revenues report. As you can see, actual revenues are performing better than anticipated, and revenue projections will be reviewed and updated during the next TIP development cycle. I'll discuss more about that during my update on the TIP development process later in the meeting. With that, we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Sam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brown, quick question. Are you seeing any decline in growth in terms of current or projections on the revenues?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Credio, we are not at this time. We're just seeing increases. But Mr. Zinda, are you seeing the same thing? I know you're tracking it very closely.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. In answer to that question, I would just refer to the official ADOT forecast, which show pretty strong growth for at least the next 10 years on their official forecast.
Thank you.
I know the county, our finance group just shared our HERF revenues that we received this last month, and it was, I think, maybe the biggest month of all of fiscal year 22. So I don't know, PAG, have you gotten your 12.6 numbers or looked that up since this agenda came out?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't believe we received the June report yet, and we should be getting that any day, but I don't believe we have that. So, thank you. But please jump in, staff, if you have other information to share on that. Thank you.
That is correct, Jamie. We have not received our end of year report quite yet. It should come soon.
Thank you. I do have some questions on how we're going to look at this with the TIP development process, but I think that probably fits in item 10 better than in this item. So I'll hold on to those questions.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion for this item with the committee? Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
So our next item, item 9, Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan, the RMAP update. Jeanette Duren.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, just wanted to bring a quick RMAP update to the group. You did receive an email about 2 weeks back with 2 asks in it. One was to continue working in the RMAP Project Explorer to clean out your projects, update cost estimates and the like, as well as delete projects out of there that you no longer foresee being in the long range plan. I did notice that many of you were in there updating your projects. So thank you to those of you who took the time to do that. You have a few more days. If you need help or need to get logged into the platform, please reach out to myself or Josh Pope, and we're happy to get you going in that. We also have reached out asking for your assistance in developing the local fund contributions to the finance plan. There was a little table as an attachment to that email. And we're also here to meet with you, and Dave Zinda and I are around. And if you need help and have questions with that, please let us know. That piece is critical information of the RMAP finance plan. So as most of you know, the RMAP has to be a fiscally constrained plan. So the finance plan is really where we're looking at those revenues and trying to determine how much money we have to spend in this thing. So that local fund contribution has always been kind of a nebulous piece of it that we're really trying to hone in on, making sure that we have as accurate of revenue projections as we can possibly put in there. So so that ask has been out. If you need help with any of those tasks, please let us know. You have a few more days, like I said, to get those in, and we can work together on getting that information. With that, we're going to move on to a presentation from Dave Zinda on the RMAP financial plan and some of the assumptions and methodologies that we're using to develop that piece. David.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and thank you, Jeanette. Yes, so let's talk finance then. So today I'll present some initial forecast among federal and state funding for inclusion in this 2055 RMAP currently in development. A lot like the TIP, the RMAP is to have a fiscally constrained list of projects where potential project cost, which we'll get to at a later time, should not exceed reasonably expected revenues. The key term there being reasonably expected. Please note that these estimates that I'm about to present to you today are rounded and kind of rough estimates, right? We'll pin down firm estimates in the future. And they do not factor in project eligibility restrictions yet, such as funding only geared towards transit versus highway expansion and the like. Additionally, local funding sources, as you know, given the ask of Jeanette and I, are not presented yet, so I can't give you a bottom line number. Once we have local forecast available, thanks to your efforts, we'll present a more thorough look at available funding, its restrictions, what's already committed, and look forward towards your final approval and recommendation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so one thing we need to keep in mind is difference between kind of growth and inflation, which might not be coming from the same economic forces. I bring this up because federal regulations require that the RMAP revenues be presented in year of expenditure dollars using an inflation rate. Inflation rates may not be the exact same as growth rates. For example, increases in STBG funding are set by government policy, and they don't necessarily track inflation of money over time, as you know. Funds are estimated preliminarily in the year of expenditure dollars. That's my first starting point, which presents the amount of funding in the year it is actually received. This is going to be different than looking at something with 2022 constant dollars in terms that we are familiar with in the future, right? To make revenue estimates more comprehensible, because it can be hard to conceive what a $2035 means in 2022, I've discounted back the year of expenditure dollar estimates into 2022 dollars using a near-term 2% discount rate and a 1.5% long-term discount rate based on the historical GDP deflator, which is a common proxy for such an exercise, and GDP growth forecast for the long term when the deflator is not available. Next slide, please. So first category, we're going to look at federal funding here first, and then state funding. I'm going to make a simple assumption through the life of the 2055 Rmap that all federal funding will increase by 2% each year. This kind of comes with a couple different considerations. Historically, FAST Act apportionments on the national level have increased by 2% each year. The new Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or bipartisan infrastructure law, also at the national level shows a 2% increase in apportionments each year. Furthermore, the Adot CFO in a recent Arizona State Transportation Board meeting showed state apportionments increasing by 2%. So I'm going to apply this 2% growth rate to both the recent federal ledger on apportionments we already have as a starting point through 2055 for FHWA programs, STBG, Transportation Alternatives or RTAG, et cetera. And I'm going to use a TIP as my starting point to forecast out with the 2% growth rate revenues for FTA programs through 2055. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Hopefully everyone is on mute. I'm sorry about that. Okay, next slide, please. So federal funding totals then through 2055, you can see that I've got it on the left-hand side there, your expenditure dollars, the middle, 2022. And as a comparison, I've also included numbers from the most recently adopted 2045 Rmap update. Now, this won't match this update portion, what you currently see in the document. I've started it at 2024 when these other numbers would in theory start and extrapolated it out to 2055 to make a fair comparison. As you can see, the numbers are fairly consistent with past forecast. Now, you might notice a difference on the RTAG or Transportation Alternative Set-Aside. The bipartisan infrastructure law did increase the set-aside for RTAG up to 10%. I believe it used to be about 6%, which is why it's higher than before. Furthermore, Arizona State, sorry, ASTP, State Transportation, it's same as STBG, right? But Arizona's version of it is estimated from the programmed TIP amounts, which were higher when the 2045 Rmap was adopted compared to what is in the currently adopted TIP now. Use it as the baseline to forecast out. All right, ready for the next slide. So competitive grants, this one is a little bit trickier. Previously, the Rmaps assumed that there would be kind of one large grant each decade. And large grant was cast in the terms of something like the Sunlink grant we received, which I think would have been around $70 to $90 million if memory serves correct at the time it was received, kind of bringing that up into 2022 dollars. That could be a little bit more. With the Port of Tucson streetcar and electric bus grants that we received over these last 10 years, we're looking at about $108 million in 2022 dollars. So going from 2024 to 2055 is going to be about 3 decades. In the spirit of being reasonable and conservative, my recommendation factor was to multiply that number times 2.5. So my total suggested money available for competitive grants that we can hypothesize will be a good amount, at least for the Rmap, will be about $270 million. Ready for the next slide. Okay, turning now then to state funding. HERF 12.6 and 2.6 are going to be estimated from official ADOT sources, which cover a period of 10 years and are updated annually in the fall by a risk analysis panel composed of professional economists. 10 years doesn't get us to 2055, so to reach that date, I'm going to extrapolate these official estimates out following an implied declining trend in growth rates, which can be seen from those official estimates. Growth starts out pretty strong over the next 10 years at growth rates as high as 4%. and then kind of tapering down a little bit, maybe towards 3.5. So over the course of the Rmap through 2055, by the time we get to those latter years, it'll look more like about 2% growth. Adot uses a variety of economic indicators and advanced econometric modeling to generate these estimates. And for more information, and you can see some of the economic variables they use for that consideration. For more information, please refer to Adot Financial Management Services. They've got some good information on the Rmap panel risk analysis that you could read up on. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's going to be nearly $2 billion available in regional HERF. So this is just our 12.6 and 2.6 sources, not the HERF you receive, available through 2055. Comparing the 2022 constant dollar estimates to the 2045 Rmap estimates, there really isn't much variation despite formally producing these in-house estimates in 2045's case, instead of using the official ones. So it's pretty consistent with what we've seen before, nothing too radical. Okay, next slide. Lastly, we have Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. This really goes towards our travel reduction program, I believe. Historically, it seems like since the beginning of time, we've received 267,000 each year. Once again, kind of in the spirit of being reasonable, it is possible that, one, maybe this amount gets increased a little bit in the next 30 years. Who knows what happens? I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow versus 30 years. Also, there may be similar programs that address a very similar issues that this one does that could receive funding in the future. And so for this reason, I'm going to suggest a very small, very modest growth rate of about 50 basis points or 0.5%. So that gets us to about 9.2 million through 2055, or 7 million in today's dollars. Back in 2045 update, we did have a higher growth rate at that time, so it was a little bit higher at 11 million. That concludes my initial preliminary estimates here. I'm happy to take any questions, should you have any.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions? I'll start off with one. I always have a question. On the ASTP, you said it was based on how much is programmed in the current TIP, but we just approved a TIP amendment that added a significant amount of the ASTP to the TIP. So is it the before the TIP amendment or after?
As we go forward, I've been mindful that there will be TIP amendments, and this is still in development. In particular, I think there's one other fund source that I wanted to check on. I can't remember off the top of my head. And that's why I said at the beginning, these are kind of still rough estimates. I want to take into account the most up-to-date information as it becomes available. There will be a point where we have to kind of cut it and move on from that point, but I can certainly incorporate TIP amendments that increases ASTP. I don't think that's a problem.
Thank you.
If I may, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and we also know that this latest TIP amendment that was just approved today is still in process. So we don't want to get ahead of our committee process and assume it will ultimately be adopted. And then after that point, as David said, the forecast can be revised. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. And I understand it's not fully approved yet. I just know that earlier when we were discussing the large amounts of money that now through the bill are coming to this region, we don't want to neglect that when we're looking at the long range forecasts, because it seems fairly significant.
Yep.
I think you had it briefly on the slides. This is the first we're seeing the slides. With the 12.6 and the 2.6, do we have factored in the fact that somewhere in this next 30-year horizon, we're all going to be driving electric vehicles, and that's going to totally change that projection? I saw there was some little comments. I wasn't sure what they meant on the slide.
Yes, I don't have control of the slides. I'm sure we can go back. I think that must have been maybe 2 or 3 slides ago. One more, there we are. So at this time, there is no consideration of EV. I know that this has been discussed internally among staff on how to handle that, and it's still an ongoing conversation at this point in time. I would also, bear in mind that as gas sales go down with the inclusion of new electric vehicles, there could reasonably be a new tax on, say, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, or the like as well, that could match or compensate for that loss.
Sure. Thank you. If possible, if we could get the slide deck to review a little bit more closely, I think that'd be really helpful. Jose. I see you're.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question. Since we're trying to capture most of the revenues in the next 20 years or so, how does the RTA Next, how does that play into this revenues? Because a lot of these projects, I tell you, if the RTA Next doesn't pass, I don't think they're going to see the day of light.
Yes, thank you for your question, Madam Chair, members of the committee. RTA Next, I'm considering in the local category, and I haven't presented local estimates. That will, of course, be a critical component. If you recall from a recent, probably within the last year, TPC meeting, if not management, and also regional council, we talked about official estimates from the Eller Business Research Center, which should be in year of expenditure dollars somewhere around the ballpark of $4 billion, about $2 billion in 2022 dollars. So that will be an instrumental part of Rmap, potential Rmap projects. I would defer to Jeanette to discuss how that might be included in the Rmap in the future.
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the TPC. So in the last Rmap update, we assumed a continuation of the RTA. As of right now, we're assuming the same thing for this one. We haven't, of course, approved a finance plan, and we're going to obviously track the progress of RTA Next as we develop the finance plan. So, I mean, we're trying to be nimble. At some point, we're going to have to either make an assumption. If a decision hasn't been made, we'll have to make an assumption. But for right now, like Dave said, we're still working on how we're going to reflect the local funds and regional funds. But yeah, I mean, we'll probably carry through the same assumption unless some change happens that we can make that determination.
Thank you, Jeanette.
And if I may just add to that, I believe, Jeanette, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that assumption has been in the Rmap with the latest adopted version as well as the previous. So in terms of reasonable assumptions of revenue, we've made that assumption for the last two Rmaps, I believe. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Yeah,
and that's a half-cent sales. Oh, sorry, Jose. It's a half-cent rather than a full cent, even though that decision point hasn't been made.
That's correct.
Okay. Jose.
There's an assumption that it is in the, it's going to be in the Rmap, the RTA Next, the revenues. It's going to be included. Okay. And if it's not, then we could always update it in the next 4 years.
That's correct.
Thanks.
I have one more question because, you brought it up. There's the Rmap, there's the RTA Next. Is there kind of a master schedule, planning schedule on these decision points? Because they do affect each other so closely. All those RTA Next projects will have to be in the Rmap. So what is that kind of?
Sure. I mean, I can't speak to the CAC and the RTA Next. So that timeline is happening in the committees. I can speak to the Rmap. And so because we're a 4-year cycle, at some point we have to call it good, right? So at some point we'll have to say, this is our reasonable expectation. As of today, we need to move forward with the project list. Should something drastically happen between our approval of the finance plan for Rmap and then the creation of the next one 4 years later, we do have the opportunity to take Rmap amendments, similar to TIP amendments. They're very infrequent, but they can happen. And, interestingly enough, if one of those projects were to, we anticipate most of those projects to be priorities of the jurisdiction. So they should be, as we develop the Rmap, they should be reflected in there. But for whatever reason, if not, like I said, we can take amendments forward. But because the cycle continues and we have to come back again, most likely what'll happen is it'll be reflected in that update versus having to bring an amendment forward. So, we're going to try to keep our process on track and on our time schedule. But like I said, we're going to have to call it good at some point with either a decision being made or an assumption moving forward.
Thank you. Do you have a master schedule for these different deadlines that'll be coming up for the next steps in the RMAP development?
No, we do not have a master schedule. We have, our anticipated approval date for regional council, and then some milestones moving forward. I mean, our biggest milestones that we're working on now are the finance plan and the project explorer. So we're really still in that developmental stage. We will have a point in time where we have to close the project list, and we're anticipating that to be sometime mid next year. And then, of course, the pieces that Josh's group is working on with the population projections and getting through that with the PopTech to start that modeling process, that's kind of all on a schedule as well. It's interesting with Rmap how many deadlines are subject to other deadlines, right? So the modeling can't happen until population projections. The project list can't be determined until the fiscally constrained finance number is adopted. So we have these sort of like milestones that we have to reach to get to the next ones. And so we're building towards those. But we similar to the TIP, like we have our 4-year time frame, they have their time frame. And so ours just keep rolling. And then, what other processes impact our decisions, it just depends on the timing of those decisions.
Thanks, Jeanette. Josh, I see you popped up. Did you want to add to that?
I was just getting ready for any questions that may come up.
Well, I'll ask one more, and I promise it's the last. So far the ask in terms of projects in the RMAP is to delete those that are either complete or no longer desired by the jurisdiction, and updating costs. So the next big milestone, I would assume from the project perspective, is adding new projects. Do we have any idea when that will be asked of us so we can kind of work ahead on that?
Sure, we're anticipating later this year, like towards the end of this year.
Okay, thank you.
And then the project explorer will probably close mid next year. So it'll be open for quite some time to add new projects. There was also a question that came in over the past couple of weeks about splitting projects. So some jurisdictions had mentioned that they have projects that aren't just going to be modified amongst the current extent of the project, but maybe they're going to split that into 2 projects. So that ability will also be opened at the time when we can start adding new projects.
And if I can add to that, the intent was to get some of this work out of the way before the TIP cycle started up. Excuse me. And the modeling exercise, excuse me, I'm sorry. The modeling exercise will have new population projections from the state this December. And we'll work with the PopTech committee this November to get back up to the state this December. We'll work with PopTech on that front. And then next spring, we'll step through the sub-regional population projection distribution, and then the TAZ population and employment distribution, so that we will have updated projections by next September. So with TIP hitting and RMAP hitting and RTA next also having its own course, we wanted to make sure we gave room for the TIP to take place. And once we open up to allow for new projects or the splitting of projects, we see that to be taking place, as Jeanette said, later this year, once the TIP cycle is giving enough room. But we have our current adopted congestion from the previous 2045 exercise. And so next spring, we'll have an update to those numbers that essentially we be looking at giving you all an opportunity to kind of revisit your project list once those numbers have come in, as we've done in the past. It's kind of an iterative exercise. You take a couple of passes at your project list, new data lands, we revisit it, and then we move on. So that's kind of the cycle.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from the committee? Discussion points, comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Jeanette, and the rest of the team. So item 10, updates on the fiscal year 24 through 28 TIP development process. Jamie Brown.
Yeah, thank you again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. In coordination with our member agencies and consistent with federal regulations, PAG updates the TIP every 2 years. The next TIP will cover fiscal years 24 through 28. And we anticipate that the process will commence next month. We will be convening one-on-one meetings with our member agency partners to discuss fiscal year TIP rollovers and also provide an opportunity to discuss the next TIP development process. So those are currently being scheduled. Thank you, Carolyn. We will also issue a notice of funding availability, and which will continue to prioritize the delivery of RTA projects. In terms of revenue projections for HERF and Surface Transportation Block Grant or STBG funding, I wanted to provide a brief update. For federal STBG, we will use a similar approach as the previous TIP process, and we'll base the projection on the obligation authority in the latest available federal ledger. For HERF 26, ADOT has requested that we use their cash flow analysis as the basis for that going forward. So we will coordinate with ADOT Finance on the appropriate numbers for the HERF 26 projection. For HERF 12.6 revenue projections, we plan to use a different approach this cycle. And this is based on comments we've heard at committee meetings since the last projections were developed. Our previous approach was based on an internal analysis of HERF actuals. This worked well for many years until the unpredictable economic fluctuations of the pandemic made projecting HERF with accuracy much more challenging. So because of the economic uncertainty early in the pandemic, as you know, we and many others used a conservative approach 2 years ago for our economic forecasts. And as we've seen, HERF revenue has come in higher than projected. Therefore, given the feedback we've received from committee members, we're pursuing an alternative approach that will base the HERF 12.6 on ADOT's official forecast. And David Zinta spoke to this earlier in the meeting, but in the fall, ADOT publishes an official 10-year HERF forecast, and this is developed with input from a panel of economists. Based on this forecast, ADOT also develops a PAG 10-year HERF 12 forecast, HERF 12.6 forecast, and we have been told that this would be available in late October. So the use of outside experts is consistent with how we approach RTA projections as well, in which we rely on Eller College's Economic and Business Research Center. We also think that this approach to regional HERF 12.6 is responsive to member agency comments, especially at the TPC level. Thus, we anticipate having all of the revenue projections available in late October, early November, and we'll convene TIP subcommittee meetings then to discuss the projections and programming of the RTA financial plan. And our aim is for the TPC to begin reviewing draft project lists in December. So with that, we're happy to take questions. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. I'll open up to the committee. Are there any questions? Jose.
Madam Chair, for the next TIP cycle, 24, 28, are we going to be allowed to submit projects 27 and 28 for fiscal year?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Rodriguez, my understanding is at this time, we're going to continue to focus on meeting the commitments to the RTA program. So I don't anticipate that we are going to have an open call for new projects other than for transit projects, similar to how we approached the TIP development process 2 years ago. We had 3 sources of transit funding that we opened up for new projects. There will be additional funding in the TIP, but we may not be able to open it up for new projects until we've addressed all the commitments with the RTA, the current RTA plan. Thank you.
Jose, did you have additional comments on that?
No, just remembering from many years back where they committed to allocating all the regional funds to the RTA, which we all agreed to, but I thought it was going to sunset in 2026, but now it sounds like it's going to be further than that.
Yeah, and Thank you, Jose. As the comment I was going to have, looking back at that action from 2014 that the RTA board made, regional council, it was just 2020 through 2026. So I think if we're extending it beyond, it sounds like that's an item that needs to go back to that body.
If I may, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Rodriguez, my understanding is that the action that the regional council, I believe, took in January changed the deadline for that commitment. So we can look back on that to confirm.
You know what, I'm happy to share my screen because I have it up here. If that would be helpful, I think that follows open meeting law.
I was just going to say that I believe that that direction in January was to continue to fill the commitments in the current RTA, and I don't believe that that means that there's still a restriction to 2026.
So this, I think you probably all are all seeing this. This is from those meeting minutes. So, you know, I would not agree with your interpretation. It says, you know, available from 2020 through 2026. And it also says that these kind of things will be revisited every 3 years and so on and so forth. So I do think this is an item that's going to require action and discussion at higher levels than our group.
Oh, excuse me, if I may, is this from 2014?
Yes, it is. These are the January 23rd, 2014 minutes.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think, yeah, and we can bring back more information at a future meeting, and thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. My understanding, though, is that in January of this year, that in that motion that was on the regional council agenda, that restated the commitment to existing projects. And I believe that it didn't put that restriction of fiscal year 2026 on that. I do open it up for any other staff members who have any other thoughts on that, but we can bring that to a future meeting and make sure we clarify. So it's an important point. Thank you.
Jose?
Madam Chair, yeah, we just want to be clear, since we're starting on the next tip cycle, we just want to know whether it is going to be available for other projects, fiscal year 2027, 2028, so that we can plan accordingly. If not, I'm okay with it, but we just need clear directions. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to claim a little bit of new guy ignorance here and want to just ask, the city is going to be going after lots of federal grants here in the next several months. And so how are we going to deal with those federal grant pursuits in the TIP?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Crudio. So we may need to ask you to elaborate a little bit more, but my understanding is that if any of our member agencies pursue any of these federal grants, and they must be reflected in the TIP, that we'll work with you to process a TIP amendment. And I do see that Carolyn is on screen. Is that correct, Carolyn? She's our TIP lead programming manager.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. So Sam, recently I understand that there was an award that was given to the city. I heard about it yesterday, so congratulations on that win. Our process with those amendments is that there's funding that's allocated from a higher jurisdiction or an outside source, such as a federal grant. We can process those as administrative amendments, and essentially we need the documentation to show that this was awarded and some clarification on fiscal years and what type of phasing, and we can process them pretty quickly for you through an administrative amendment. It's helpful to keep us in the loop on that, so thanks for bringing it up today. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Robin.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Carolyn, just to verify, if there is no upper agency funding, none of these projects will appear in the TIP. So for example, if we intend to go for a federal project and we have it mostly funded locally, then it will not appear in the TIP. Is that correct? So a locally funded, 100% locally funded project will not appear in the TIP unless, can you let us know exactly what the process is if we would like to do such a thing?
Sure. So traditionally, we don't program local funds on projects in the TIP if it doesn't meet some threshold. So a threshold would be, say there's a roadway project, but it does not require, it's not required to be reviewed and modeled on for air quality. We wouldn't traditionally enter that project into the TIP or program it. However, if there's something that you're moving forward on and you're hoping to get a federal grant, like the one I just mentioned, it's nice for us to know that that's happening. And we often will write concurrence documents or some kind of approval letter that says that we'll program that as soon as the funding has been designated for your jurisdiction. Again, like, we are excited and happy to see this new money coming into the region, and however we can support you in receiving those funds, we're happy to help. And with the TIP amendments, as long as we have the information, we can process them very quickly if it's an administrative amendment. Other processes take a little bit longer, like the formal amendment, but that wouldn't be necessary in this case. Does that answer your question?
Thank you so much. It answers most of it. If I may ask one further question. We've been told by Adot for the federally funded projects that they will not begin review unless it is in the TIP. And we are trying in some cases to get a head start on design for some of these projects and do need some review by Adot since they're aimed at being federally funded. So that's part of our rationale for trying to get things into the TIP earlier when we have some of these things. So I would ask that maybe we could revisit the process as this new bill is moving quickly, and we're getting some very, very big feedback that projects that are shovel ready are going to fare better. And so in order to bring more funding into the region, I would say it is perhaps a good idea to put some of these projects in to the TIP a little earlier in order to advance our ability to achieve more federal funding.
Okay, thank you for that information, Robin. It's helpful for us with understanding. You know, there's always case-by-case decisions, and if there's an email or a document, that you could share with us from that higher jurisdiction, such as ADOT, that would be something that we could use to make an exception if that was necessary. For the last couple of months, what we've been doing is drafting formal letters that are signed by our executive, and those seem to be working. However, you know, talk to us. Please keep the lines of communication open. You know, my goal is really to help kind of facilitate this movement as simple as possible for you and also for other members of the community. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions on the revenue side of things for the TIP development. You mentioned the 2.6 will go from the cash flow analysis, but the 12.6 will be the ADOT forecast. So why aren't we using the same tool for both of those? Or is that the same tool?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So we don't, and I have not seen a cash flow analysis for HERF 12.6 that ADOT prepares. There is one for 2.6. And that's something that I think is something, at least from my perspective, I've only been aware of for the last year and a half or so. And it's something that they're now updating pretty regularly. And so, and that's the way that they're tracking all the expenses to HERF 2.6. For 12.6, because there's not a cash flow analysis and because there's an official forecast, that seems like the best source for 12.6. But that's why they're not the same source.
Does the ADOT forecast include both 2.6 and 12.6? I thought, you know, at one point you all shared that with us. So it would be I mean, I would find it helpful if you could share what the differences are between this cash flow analysis, which I don't think I've seen before, and the ADOT forecast. I think that'll give us a better idea of the revenue picture. My second question is, back a few months ago, you'd sent out a schedule for the planned, TIP development process. It sounds like some of those timeframes are changing because we won't have revenue projections till late October. So one, how are we having a NOFA before we have revenue projections? And two, could we get an updated schedule?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So during the last TIP development cycle, we had a NOFA that included a schedule. And so, and then we also had the funding that was available for transit. That was, I think, 5307, 5339, and STBG Flex. So at this time, we're anticipating a similar approach. So we're going to have funding available for those 3 transit sources that will be included in the NOFA. We're going to update the schedule to reflect what I just reported about the change in when we'll have the revenue projections and be able to work with the TIP subcommittee in late October, November, and into December on the projections and the primarily the RTA financial plan.
Okay, I'll just emphasize that I think one of our big sticking points the last cycle was the ability to see the full picture at once, all revenues, all projects, make sure that we're hitting those constraints, that we're using all of the money to the best of this communities, they'll see projects at the end. So I want to put that out there, that that's an expectation, that it won't be piecemealed and we'll be seeing full picture, and hopefully that can be achieved.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Madam Chair. And, I think we're going to try to do our best here to accommodate that. But I think just to manage expectations, we may be in a process where we're bringing lists through that are piecemeal, and as soon as we can assemble all of them and put them in one master list that's generated by the TIP database, which we've heard is very helpful for you to see the full funding picture, we will do that. But I don't believe that we'll have that available in December. I would think that we would have something like the RTA financial plan, the transit working group list. We may not have the ADOT list at that time, for example. So I think what we're seeing is we understand that's been a concern. We want to accommodate that, but we also hear that we also heard something else, that we don't want to delay the process too much and not see any lists until we have everything. We heard that the TPC wanted to see some of the lists as they're developed. So that's what we're proposing in this process.
So I mean, for me, the biggest one is going to be the 12.6. We way under forecasted for that, for the existing TIP. So are we going to kind of guesstimate until we get to October? Because otherwise that's going to be, tens of millions of dollars we're trying to program at that last minute. And I realize, I acknowledge they go to RTA projects, but to this whole cost to complete exercise that's happening, there's so many activities going on at once. We want to make sure that we're all circling around the same numbers and being consistent across these programs.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that's one of the trade-offs. We were challenged with our internal forecast last time, although it was available earlier. We're going to rely on an official forecast, but it'll be available later. And there may be some working with some provisional numbers, but I think we want to share all the official forecasts at one time and work with that. Like you said, we're still prioritizing RTA commitments, so that'll be our focus.
Okay, thank you. As soon as you have an updated schedule, we'd really appreciate it.
And I'll just say that, yeah, we intend to include that updated schedule in the NOFA, and we'll put subject to change. We'd like to adhere to it, but as you're aware, and others who were involved in the last TIP development process, some things change. So we have additional committee meetings, for example. We'll adjust the schedule as we move forward and share that with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee? Hearing nothing. Thank you very much, Jamie and Carolyn, for that. We'll move on to item 11, future agenda items. Does anybody have anything they'd like to propose? Sam.
Yes, Madam Chair, I have one item and then one question. The item is, I know there was some email chatter about jurisdictions making presentations on their RTAG projects. And so I would like to just know when that's going to be scheduled, or if we can go ahead and get that on a future agenda item as an agenda item. And then the second question is, again, new guy ignorance here. Has there been any conversation about moving these meetings to in person? I know some of the other committees I serve on are in person, and just curious if that's for consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Sam.
Madam Chair, if I may answer the first question for you all. We are in the process of preparing dates. You should hear from me shortly on when the presentations will be necessary. We're happy to say that we do now have a full panel. We were kind of because of vacation times and people in and out of the office, we wanted to be respectful to our member jurisdiction's time as well as yours. So we wanted to ensure that we had the right dates in place before we started sharing information. So you should be hearing from me in the next couple of days. Thank you. Anything else on the RTAG? And then Jamie, I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer the second question.
And if I may jump in just to say, I think for this item, we were really not supposed to discuss the item. So unfortunately, I don't think we can really answer questions on future agenda items. Is that correct, Jeanette?
That's correct. But, you know, noted that you have the comment on if we're going to move this to an in-person, you know, we can look at that and decide. We haven't made a determination as of right now. We're going to keep them virtual as of right now. But if there's a change in that or a desire to change that, we can have that discussion.
I'd like to add a potential item for a future agenda, and that is a discussion of the infrastructure bill and all of these federal grants that are coming out. I know that from our research, a lot of it's really helpful to have support across the region, and it's looking at a lot of different factors that PAG data would be really helpful in supporting. So I think that might be a helpful item for us to discuss.
Noted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other items for the group to discuss in the future? I don't see any raised hands. Nobody's shouting out. So our next item is adjournment. Do we need to take a motion to do that, or can we just adjourn? But I'll move that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.